morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. I'm Craig Whitney, the President and CEO of the Chamber. We're happy to have all of you here to discuss a very important issue for our region, our community, our state. And as most of you know, I think the Chamber has been extremely involved in this issue for the last 8 or 9 years. And we actually formed a business leaders task force to be engaged in making sure that this project happens. So
before we have some comments from them, let me just give you a brief history of the Business Leaders Permanent Flood Protection Task Force that Craig mentioned. Back in 2013, during a legislative session, it became very apparent to the Chamber that there wasn't an organized group of business leaders that could be a voice for the importance of achieving permanent flood protection for our metro area. So the Chamber organized a task force that is made up of about 30 business leaders, and we began to meet on a regular basis. And basically, we were on deck to be mobilized when needed. So during that current session back then, we had multiple car loads, bus loads, plane loads of business leaders who made multiple trips to Bismarck. What we realized was missing with the legislature was this group of business people who could speak to the importance of how a flood would jeopardize local businesses and how we needed them to continually emphasize that flooding in the spring could not only jeopardize the current businesses in Fargo, but would also jeopardize some of the major businesses that could leave the area and other major businesses that we were trying to bring into the area. Those efforts proved very successful, and this is when the commitment for the original $450 million over multiple bienniums was made by the North Dakota legislature. Obviously, it's confirmed or reaffirmed every 2 years, but that was the original commitment, $450 million, that was made for our flood protection. Just this morning, if you've noticed in the news, the National Weather Service increased the threat of significant flooding. So those of us who can remember 1997, 2009, 2010, 11, 13. I mean, some of those were record-breaking years for flooding. So another purpose of our task force is to continually remind people in our area, particularly younger people who haven't lived through those floods, but continually remind people how important it is that we achieve permanent flood protection. And so I don't think anybody can argue the fact, if you go back and look at some of those years, and if you remember what it was like to live through them. So now let me introduce Kelly Armstrong, our congressman, and he's got a few remarks for us.
First, I'd like to say thank you to both the Fargo and Moorhead delegations for being out in DC 2 weeks ago and meeting with us. This project's, gone on. It started and it continues to move on, and I just want everybody here to know how hard they continue to work on it on a daily basis. The federal government, under normal circumstances, can work too slow for most people, particularly for North Dakotans. And this is an area where they continue to keep moving forward and doing that and continue to push the ball forward because it is so important to the community. And what we need to do at the federal level right now, there's short-term things, there's long-term things, but essentially we need to continue to fight for as much federal funding as we can get from any ways in which we can do that. I have to say a special thanks to Senator Hoban and his staff. As somebody who's new to the game in DC, they are very helpful. They keep us informed, and we will be working with them closely to secure WIFIA funding and through any other mechanisms we can. Also say thanks to all my old friends, as in old in time, not in age, from the current and past North Dakota legislators. It is great to see all of you in the room right now. This project's been going on since I got in the state legislature in 2013, and everybody in here cares a lot about it, and it's important for not only Fargo, but the surrounding community. And I do want to say a special thanks to Senator Gary Lee and Senator Ron Sorbog. They serve on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and they continue to work on this as hard as they can, I mean, at the end of the day, the numbers need to line up, and they work every day to make sure that happens. And with that, I'm going to introduce one of my great old friends, and by that one I do mean in age.
I get to speak last.
He does get to speak last. Al and I've gotten to know Al over the last 6, 7, 8 years, and I don't know if there's anybody that has done as much work for this project at the state level and making sure that all of those puzzle pieces come into place than Al Carlson. So with that.
Well, this is a very unusual role for me. First of all, since I'm not the leader anymore, I don't get many calls to come talk to you. It's funny, they can't remember after a week where you sat in the legislature. You've forgotten really quickly. But then I decided, the best thing to be probably is an analyst. Because you can make all kinds of predictions and you never have to be right. And then if you progress from that, you can be a consultant where you actually get paid for saying things that don't make any sense. But what I'm going to give you is a little bit of perspective in history, just so you understand where this is all at the legislative level. And one thing I don't have anymore is I don't have the ability to cast a vote. But what I do have is I have a lot of friends in the legislature, people that I appointed as chairman of various committees that I can sit down with and talk with and try and analyze and figure out how we best make those dollars work so that we can get the package put together so that the city of Fargo, Cass County, West Fargo can be protected by flood protection. Now, would I tell you this is going to be a real easy sale? I would tell you it is not. But is it impossible? Not even close to impossible. We need to use some creative financing. There's only so much money in the pot. And when these appropriators sit down, and the good news from my perspective is that the water budget is now in the House, which means we get the last look. We get to wait for the March revenue forecast, which is always crucial because that's how you build your final budget. When those numbers come in, the price of oil is not quite as high as we like, but our production is way higher than we thought it would be. So there's going to be additional money in the Resources Trust Fund. There's going to be additional money that goes into SIF. There are some bills floating through the legislature where there is a $500 million revolving infrastructure loan program, which we started when I was there, which was only a couple $100 million. That might be an option to look at to receive some funds to get to that magic total. There is the opportunity to craft some financing through the Bank of North Dakota. And by the way, I'm convinced we'll need to do something with that anyway, because if the project starts, cash flow is going to be an issue. When a contractor works, the contractor wants to be paid. So they'll have to deal with that as well. But so far, when we started, it was $450 million. Just a little quick history from the legislative perspective. And the reason that number was arrived at, Senator Holman was then the governor, was that it was going to be a $1.8 billion project, half of it paid by the federal government, half of the half paid by the locals, and half paid by the state. Thus, the $450 million. Then several bienniums ago, I introduced a bill for $120 million, which would be allowed for interior flood protection. And that money, about half of that money was used for various projects, matched with the sales tax. Last session, we allowed that money to slide over if the diversion starts to the diversion. So the total money the state has committed thus far is $570 million. Well, that brings us today where the bill came out of the Senate, where they added an extra 2 bienniums of $66.5 million because we knew we had to pay it over time. So that brings the total to $703 million is the way the bill sits today. That number really needs to be about $180 million higher to equal the numbers of where the proposed funding, the total cost of the project will be. So where does the extra $180 million comes from? It's important. This is a multi-legged stool. I know that the senator and the representatives are working hard on this, but the federal government, in the House's perspective, in my opinion anyway, needs to know that the federal partner is there. They need to know, and with the sales tax and the various things the city has done, they need to know the city is there. And that leaves the state with the responsibility of filling the gap in the end. Again, there are lots of options that can happen along the way with that. There's many opinions. I have talked to Leader Pollard. What I will do is when the hearings are over and the actual committee works takes place, I will go out and I'll meet with Leader Pollard, with Chairman Delzer, with the Water Resources section, and just see what their options are and what the numbers look like after the March forecast. So this is not the time to panic. This is the time to sit back and say, how do we fill all the gaps? How do we fill the gaps? Because my understanding is, and I've been talking with the mayor and with Mr. Grubb, is that in order for the P3 project to work, we need to make sure that we have the funding sources in place for all of those before that P3 project can go forward. Well, we need to make sure that the language somehow says in the bills that we pass that that gap will be filled and that money will be available. And that's going to be work. I mean, at this point in time, I feel bad. This is the first time I've not been involved sitting in the chair where I could actually help direct. But I will go meet with the people in there and see what I can do. Another key factor is the governor. You know, whether we talk politics or not politics, the life and death of this prairie dog bill and how he handles that is really crucial. If that were to get vetoed, that would be interesting. That'd be interesting. But what we need, and he has some concerns about how they would use for expanding cities and stuff, but the point is that is a key ingredient to many of the legislators that are out there. So you have to understand that not only is there policy, but there's politics. And I think that if you relax, take a deep breath, the business community, Tom, was involved before. I remember speaking to a room full of people when this first started, and I got just absolutely beat up because I said, you need to make sure all the pieces are together before you start. And in the end, that was the right way to do it. But at the time, it was like we were trying to hold up the project. That wasn't the point. You cannot throw all this on the back of the taxpayers of Cass County. It needs to be a partnership of all the people involved, because special assessments will kill the growth of this city if that's our result. That's Al Carlson's biased opinion, having been a contractor and fought specials for 25 years. I can tell you that that is not the best solution. If that's the only one left, we have a real interesting challenge for the growth of our community. So Prairie Dog, the infrastructure loan package, the Bank of North Dakota, the Cash Available and Resources Trust Fund, give us 4 options to look at as we go down the road. And I think the solution is there. I think the tendency is to push too hard sometimes. Let them do their work. Let them look at all the numbers. Let them analyze the numbers. Come with a proposal that gives a mixture of all of those. And I think we'll see a successful completion of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Armstrong. You're in a unique position, having served in Bismarck and having worked with some of our current legislators and now working on the national level. And Al, I don't think there's anybody who's in a better position to help with our efforts. You understand Bismarck, and we just really appreciate you being here, and also appreciate you agreeing to be on our task force. So thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Mary Sherling, Cass County Commissioner and also Chair of the Flood Diversion Board Authority.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Tom, for your work on this important issue. I also want to thank all of the business leaders who have given their time and energy over the last 10 years to stay involved and up to date through the development of this dynamic project. I am confident to say that without the support of those in this room and others in the group over the years, we would not have had the success that we've seen in being able to move this project as far forward as we've already done. Thanks also to our Minnesota leadership for the work done to obtain a permit from the state of Minnesota in December, and by the great work being done by Congressman Armstrong and the other members of our congressional delegation that you heard about earlier. We are closer than ever to a realization of this historic project for our region. This project is an investment not only in infrastructure, but in generations to come. We need your group support and powerful voices now as we look to secure the last pieces in our financial puzzle with the state of North Dakota. We are so grateful for the work of especially our three Cass County State Senators, Gary Lee, Ron Sorbog, and Larry Robinson, as they brought forward a funding bill that increased funding for the project by over $130 million. With a 40-5 vote, it's clear that the state's support remains firm. As we look towards the second half of the legislative session, we stay the course as we work with House leaders across the state to secure the support we need to begin construction as the first United States Army Corps of Engineers public-private partnership in the nation. And I can tell you, after having a recent trip to DC, there's a lot of support for this. It's innovative. It can really move projects across the nation that have been stuck in limbo for a lot of years. It's consistent with what the president's vision is, and we had a very positive reception when we were last out there. So really looking forward to working with our federal partners. Today, together we are faced and overcome a lot of hurdles to get where we are today. I would also like to thank my fellow Diversion Board members who have worked tirelessly on this project over the years. We understand and deeply appreciate the complexity of the remaining issues, and we're working diligently to resolve these. I'm confident that working towards a shared goal of flood protection for our region, we will continue to find success through compromise, understanding, and persistence towards what is necessary for the safety of our citizens. In the meantime, as was mentioned, the latest flood forecast reminds us that we are still only one sandbag away from devastating loss. Thank you for having us here this morning. Really appreciate it. At this point, I would like to introduce Joel Paulson, a Moorhead City Councilman and a fellow Diversion Board of Authority member.
I want to thank the business community, first of all, for being so engaged in this project. This project is all about safety, stability, and certainty. And without those things, we can't continue to grow our communities and our economy in this region. And it's so important that we do that because we are a regional leader. You look around us for 250 miles, and I would consider Fargo-Moorhead the regional leader for that entire area. From the Minnesota perspective, Moorhead's always been very engaged in this project. It is extremely important to us. It just so happens that the diversion is being built on the North Dakota side, which kind of ties our hands with on the state of Minnesota a little bit from the funding side. But we have committed to funding our share and our responsibility of this project. I'd like to thank our legislators in the past for being able to bring $120 million in flood infrastructure for the city of Moorhead. And I was actually in St. Paul yesterday meeting with our legislative staff, and we dropped the bill for $39 million in the state legislature for this session. That would also go into flood protection efforts for the city of Moorhead. This project it's protecting a $20 billion investment. I think that's the numbers that we've calculated. And when you think about that, and you think about what has happened in the past with Grand Forks, with the flood of 2009, there's really no question that this project needs to come to fruition. And I know all the members of the Diversion Authority Board. I know the local leaders. I know our legislative delegations and representatives are all on board with this. And it is so important that we get this completed. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary and Joel. Mary, you've been a very articulate supporter of the diversion. We appreciate all of your efforts, and Joel, we can't underestimate the importance of the support for Moorhead and Minnesota, so thank you. Now let me introduce another member of our task force, John Rewire. John is President and CEO of Eventide. John.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here representing our business leaders of the task force. I left house this morning and my wife said, "Oh, a tie on Friday must be serious." And I said, yeah, it really is. Eventide represents 4 communities throughout Fargo-Moorhead, serving nearly 600 older adults on any given day. After being asked to speak this morning, it always forces us to step back and I'll use the word reminisce. I don't know if that's the right choice of words about our experience, which is now 10 years ago. Gets to be this time of year and we look around our leadership table and our staff ranks and we start to really get nervous that a small fraction of those folks are even still there 10 years later that experienced what we experienced 10 years ago. So I want to just paint a little bit of a picture and knowing that I'm here representing the business community, really economics is the last thing on my mind right now and it really has more to do with the people that we serve. And I see Senator Lee in the audience who also serves on our board, so glad to see her here as well. But going back 10 years ago, reminiscing about this whole event, at that time we had to make arrangements for about 450 older adults in a matter of hours, many of whom are extremely frail and needing ambulances to transfer. And when we think about older adults, sometimes we think about, well, you know, there's wheelchairs involved, there's walkers. We're talking about, in many cases, very chronically ill folks being served in our healthcare centers, our hospitals, needing stretchers. And you can't load stretchers on school buses. That's what I can tell you. It takes ambulances. And simply put, in a situation like that, we aren't anywhere near able to deal with that as a community or even a state or a region. We were very fortunate in 2009 that many things went our way. We had a lot of providers in the area that were willing to work with us. I still have favors I'm repaying to this day of peers of mine within 100 miles who actually took the risk of exceeding their licensed capacities, taking on many of our folks, knowing whether or not they get paid was a mystery in terms of providing extra staff and things that were needed at the time. So we were able to place most of those folks within 100 miles of our campus, with one exception. We had a group of about 24 residents that we chartered a bus for some of our more mobile residents, and we found a place in the Twin Cities of a partner that we worked with there. We were fortunate. We had other peers of ours that had to take refuge with their residents in area churches. So you can just imagine, you know, what you're putting up with to try to care for very specific needs in a church sanctuary, all the way to loading up a plane. And I don't care how far that plane is going, this is a very difficult journey for the folks that we serve. The thing that stands out most vividly to me is when you have a situation like that, instantly, the government is here to help. So we had really fantastic federal and state kind of emergency management teams. And the gravity of the situation was recognized right away when they said, you know, successful outcomes and metrics for a move and a relocation like this are measured in morbidity rates. And that's pretty serious stuff when you think about the people that are under your charge and your care. And I remember specifically having to fill out ID tags for each and every one of our residents before the relocation, with one of the options upon arrival being deceased. So that really hits home why it's so important that we not do everything we can to prevent this from happening again. Again, we were very fortunate. Most of our folks were gone for almost 10 days, because if you recall, there was also a second crest scare during that time. These are things I didn't remember until I was forced to reminisce. Thank you, Craig, for this opportunity. And in short, our experience with the flood of 2009 recalls an unprecedented request of resources needed to move, not just in our case, but thousands of vulnerable adults, hospital patients, and others needing assistance out of harm's way in usually a matter of hours, not days. This created an impossible demand on logistics with regard to transportation, relocation sites, and staff. And that's the other thing people don't think about, that folks at Sanford and Essentia and places like ours, we had staff that were there that were also worried about their own families, their own properties at risk, and in many cases put those needs aside to be there to serve our residents. Really what we're most interested in is, as a regional center for healthcare and senior living facilities, the threat of flooding offers these serious logistical and safety risks to all of us. And although a decade has passed since the 2009 flood threat, the memories for all of us are etched in our memory. We must do everything we can to prevent the need for further evacuations by building permanent flood control. Thank you.
John, thank you for sharing those specific insights into how floods impact your business. So now let me bring it back up, Congressman Armstrong and Al and Mary and Joel, and we're going to open it up for questions.
Maybe I could just throw this out to the floor, and any of you can address it if you like to. But one of the complications, of course, are the administrative appeals in Minnesota, and I think a lot of people are worried that even if the end result is that the permit is upheld and the diversion can go forward, that this will result in possibly a lengthy delay, which only complicates things and increases the cost. Is that a big concern? Are there realistic hopes that maybe it won't come to that?
That is always a concern. The opposition to this project has created considerable delays and increase in costs. That certainly is their right to seek further remedies, but we have worked diligently with the state of Minnesota to get a permit. The Minnesota DNR tells us that they're very confident that their permit is very defensible. They have issued it with many conditions that we feel we can meet, and we plan to move forward. We are working with any parties right now that have raised concerns with that permit. A couple of weeks ago, we did apply for our own permit with the Buffalo Red Watershed District. And that is one avenue that they can use their own permitting process to feel comfortable with us moving forward. Regardless, the project will get built, whether it's we start digging today, well, maybe not today, but this spring or next spring, we still are moving forward. The delays just cost more money, and then we have to go back and ask for more. That's the dilemma. We are able at this time, however, to move forward with land acquisition and to do some maintenance. So I am happy to say that we will be working with landowners to secure property. We've had a lot of landowners that have contacted us that have been truly sitting in limbo, whether they want to move south, which is understandable this time of year, or lives change and people want to move on. And so we're starting to work now with those landowners to get that property secured for the diversion. In the footprint of the actual channel, there's quite a cost savings to secure all of that land ahead of time before the P3 contractors start working, about a $50 to $60 million savings by doing that. But it also helps those landowners move forward. We're also educating landowners and working on a flowage easement for the rest of the property that will be held upstream. And I have to emphasize, sometimes people think that we're building a big dam south of town that you can take your grandkids out fishing in. That's not the case. It will be operating roughly once every 20 years. Of course, the last few years, maybe it would have been operated more often than that, but generally it would be operating once every 20 years. And even when it did operate, it would be operating during early spring, obviously March, early April, before any farming would have gotten started out there. So we want to make sure that those landowners are treated fairly, and we are in the middle of a study on what the appropriate compensation for those flowage easements is. We have finished phase 1 of that, and we will now drill down further into phase 2. We are working with an appraisal firm and NDSU to get those numbers right, and we are engaging an ag committee to make sure that we have their input as well for any concerns that they have.
Maybe a question for Al, since we got you up there. Listening to the Senate debate on the Water Commission budget, or the funding for the diversion there was some questions raised and maybe some pointed fingers about the far diversion. Are there cracks developing in what we had a pretty sound foundation?
You know, I think that's part of the process, is to make sure you properly vet all these and that you're spending the taxpayers' dollars and you're spending them wisely. But I think if you look back in history, the legislature's been very supportive of water projects around the state. We might have disagreements over who got how much here and who got how much there. But if you look at the history of the legislature, the funding has been very good to support those that needed it. Now, there's gonna be different ideas, should you have more interior flood protection? Should you not do the diversion? Those debates will always take place. I think the key to answer the other question a little bit too is the fact that the more of these obstacles that you get out of the way, the easier it is for the legislature, which meets every other year, to make a decision to put the money in the pot. You know, knowing what Minnesota's gonna contribute, knowing that the federal government is secure, knowing that the permits have all been signed and dotted, and that the lawsuits, for the most part, have either been removed or have been resolved. And as those things take place, I think it's much easier to get the money in place at the legislative level. But there will always be debates over whether or not it's the right thing to do. You know, when some people view it as a flood protection and other people view it as a dam, you're always gonna have disagreements. There's no question about it. But related to the Eventide story, I can tell you that when you walk out the side door of my house and 3 feet from my house are sandbags, which have now been taken care of because of interior flood protection and by having water retention, it's worth every nickel that the state has contributed to save the largest city in the state. Fargo cannot be on fire like Grand Forks was. It just cannot happen. And like Tom said, it'll destroy our growth. So, will there be disagreements? Absolutely. Can they be resolved? And I think wiser heads will prevail and realize the economic generator that the valley is. And in the end, this project should move forward with all those little check boxes checked off. So the key for you guys is to get those boxes checked off and get them checked off as soon as you can, because it makes the job at the legislature much easier.
Maybe a quick question for Minnesota. We dropped the bill for Minnesota funding. We've been concentrating quite a lot on the North Dakota side and what it is we need to do to communicate. What do we need to do to communicate and express our support on the Minnesota side?
Well, I think we've done a really good job of reaching out to the state. I mean, going back to the governor's task force, it was paramount for this project that we did that process and we vetted the issues out through that process. I believe it was also an educational process for many people in St. Paul to learn about the project and understand what this is all about. And I think that went a long way in getting support at the DNR level and at the governor's level as well. So we're going to continue to lobby our legislators, make sure that they understand where we're at in the project process, what's developing on the North Dakota side, what we're doing at the federal level. We're going to also continue to work with the DNR through the contested permit that's ongoing right now. And we've been providing our local city staff to be able to attend those watershed meetings, be available for any questions the watershed has. And really, you know, these are appointed watershed managers, and they're very close to people that are being affected by this project. And so they're doing their job, and it's a process, and we'll work through that process and check off those boxes, like Al mentioned.
Well, once again, thank you, Congressman Armstrong. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Joel. I look around the room. There's so many people here that have been so instrumental in this effort. Think of Mayor Mahoney and Mayor Dardis, Senator Mathern, who's on the Senate Appropriations Committee in Bismarck. Thank you, everybody, for all of your efforts and in the past and also continuing. And thank you for great to see such a good representation of our local press. So thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.